Chapter 4 of Booked for Murder, a bookish mashup. Xander held the door open for Ivy as they left Balefire Books and Tea. The spring-loaded wooden screen door slammed. They stood side by side, facing the bay, scanning the sea. She glanced at him and realized she was looking at his arm. She had to look up, way up, to see his face. He was looking down at her. She smiled weakly. "Where did you park?" Xander asked. "Remember, I came in on the bus. I don't have a car," Ivy said. Right, of course you don't. "It doesn't look like a bad walk to your home," Xander shrugged. "It isn't. Sometimes I walk to town to take a break. Clear my head." She nodded. "Do you want to walk today?" "I drove in. My car's down there." He pointed to a string of cars parked on the block. Ivy followed his finger. She couldn't tell which one he was pointing to, but she was pretty sure it was the BMW SUV. It was hard to keep up with his long strides. "I can't believe your credentials. Do you have a CV I can look at?" Xander asked. "I'll have to download and print it for you," Ivy said, trying to sound calm and buy time. She gave him an insincere smile. "What am I doing? They fixed my diploma, but I haven't been on to check and make sure my transfer degrees are updated." "At least he hasn't asked for a letter of recommendation. I'd have to white out my old name and pencil in Ivy." The SUV smelled like leather and sea air. He let her in and walked around to the driver's side, got in and started the car. Even though it was nippy outside, he rolled down the window, letting the fresh air tangle Ivy's hair and ruffle his. She closed her eyes and took a slow, deep breath. For the first time in a long time, she felt her heart calm and the perpetual knot of anxiety unravel. It didn't take them long to leave Main Street and turn west onto a narrow road that was bordered by tall Pacific pines. The smell of pine needles and loomy earth overcame the smell of the sea. The car rolled silently along the wandering lane while she looked in the surrounding forest. The trees canopied the street and shut out the light. Growing close together, the trees sheltered massive ferns and a myriad of daisies, milk thistles, foxglove, and clover. Then she gasped. Elk! So close she could see their eyes following them, chewing quietly. Maybe 20 does and a young bull that stood taller than the car. A large bull with 7-point antlers stepped between the herd and their car. As she and Xander drove past, the silent audience watched them. She looked at Xander. He was smiling like he saw elk every day of the week. While keeping his eyes on the road, Xander said, "Aren't they beautiful? There are 2 herds in the area that travel back and forth. This is one of their stops along the way. They're massive. I felt so small. I wanted to point out the window and shout, 'Cow,' like a little kid." She fell back in her seat and shook her head, embarrassed by her enthusiasm. The forest opened for a moment, and she could see a shingled cottage set a little back from the lane. The hybrid SUV silently passed it, giving Ivy a glimpse of another cedar-sided cottage, deeper in the woods. The road snaked right, and he stopped at a large set of iron gates hung between 2 stone pillars of river rock. A tall iron fence disappeared into the woods on either side of the gate. He punched in a code, and the gate swung open, allowing them to pass. It was all she could do to breathe deeply and somehow avoid the hiccups. Something about the clang of the closing gates made a knot in her stomach. She didn't ask, but he offered. "I give my friends, and now you, your own personal code. The gate keeps a log and a video of who comes in and out. Don't forget your code, and don't share it. I'm not smart enough to get you a new one. If you lose or forget your code, I'll have to spend a day on hold waiting for tech support to ask if I turned it off and turned it on." So if the woman, what was her name, Bonnie Riley, jumped from the lighthouse, she had to get through this gate? The gate keeps people out, but could it also keep people in? Her stomach dropped. She looked at him. A breeze from the open window ruffled his hair again like a man's cologne commercial. She quickly looked back at the gate, wondering if she would fit through the bars or could scale the wall. No, he doesn't feel like a murderer, but then, how many murderers have you been around in, well, other than the one you married? So far, my taste has been in my mouth. She silently snuck a few more deep breaths, but it was too late. The trauma switch had already been flipped. She knew adrenaline was coursing through her system. Hiccup. The corner of his mouth turned up slightly. Get it together. Breathe through it. I'm going to feel like this for 30 more minutes or until he kills me. Hiccup. She held her breath. What's her name? Bonnie's death my problem? Stay in your own lane. This isn't my problem. I'm gonna die. But look at him. Like he read her mind, he slowed to a stop. He looked incredibly sad for a microsecond, and then he locked eyes with her. He broke away and closed his eyes while he raked his hair with both hands, hesitating pensively. I am so sorry. It had never occurred to me that you would be afraid of me. He kept his eyes on the road. She could see him thinking. Then he turned and his eyes looked straight through her again. This thing with Bonnie is one off, I promise. We're all a little spun by it. He steadied her face, frowning and shaking his head. She hiccuped again. Her hands flew up and covered her mouth, but it didn't take hold before the next hiccup. She tried to maintain eye contact with him, to read him, but it was too hard. Is he angry? Frustrated? I can't make the same mistake. I didn't suspect Ian until D-Day. She looked down at her hands. Her mind was in overdrive. What is he doing? She put her hand on the door, wondering if it would open when she pulled the handle. His head dropped and he groaned. She froze. When he raised it again, she was shocked to see water pooled in his eyes, blinking to hold it back. I don't want anybody to be afraid of working with me. Here, I knew you were too good to be true. I can take you back to Aggie. When he put the car in reverse, she reached out and touched his hand and shook her head no. She surprised herself. What am I doing? Well, I never learn. He narrowed his eyes. Ivy watched emotion change his face as he was planning every word he would say. After the longest minute of her life, he put his hair behind his ears. It failed to stay in place. He said, I promise you you're safe here. You're safe with me. Anderson, Jenny, anyone who lives or works here. He motioned towards the house, shifting in his seat, allowing her to face him. Every muscle in her jaw was clenched. Chewing her pinky fingernail without thinking, she silently searched his face for a tell, a lie, and only found authentic pain. The longer she looked at his beautiful face and questioning eyes, the more tension rolled off her like rain on a window. A completely inappropriate calm slowed her heart and breathing. Somewhat relaxed, she shrugged and said, You can't blame a girl for being too careful, can you? I think you're worth the risk. He fell back in his seat and attempted a smile, but it only came across more like an awkward grin under sad eyes. Good. I thought I was going to have to call Veronica and beg for mercy and for help. She tilted her head, questioning. You don't like her? She's one of my best friends. She's just a little bossy. Okay, a lot bossy, but a great organizer. If you want something done, she's the person you want in charge. Luckily, everything she does is impressive. Some of her events rival New York galas. Chuckling, he put the car in drive and continued to follow the short road until it entered the field at the top of the cliff with no guardrail. I hate heights. She studied a gravel path that peeled off the main road and disappeared into the trees. Pathways lined with solar lights led from the road to an eclectic mix of small log cedar-sided cabins, nestled in the woods just past the field and south of the house. They emerged from the trees, the clouds parted, and patches of blue appeared. The sun was drying the dew from the green field that was 2 football fields wide. It had waist-high fences on the south side made with long pieces of driftwood between random posts. Xander made a sweeping motion like a game show host. Welcome to the sanctuary. It was so beautiful it made her heart skip a beat. A large, vintage-looking pergola sat in the middle of the field with a brick fire pit that was surrounded by rustic Adirondacks. The fence had a 50-yard opening, allowing people in the pergola an unobstructed view of the ocean. A wall on the north side of the opening was created with river rock in what looked like random patterns, like it had been tossed there thousands of years ago and not carefully planned. What is that? There were 2 deck chairs. Another climb and a patio surrounded the west side of the... What do you call that? The manor? The estate? Holy macaroni, is that an infinity pool? Xander nodded. Yep. He pulled into a short driveway and a detached 2-car garage. Your home. It's stunning. I would love to know the lighthouse history. Well, they say it's haunted. He rolled his eyes. I bought the property years before I could afford to build. When life was, hard. I planned the house and I dreamed about life in Balefire. You can see why I don't want to move ever again. This is why I guard my privacy and my friends respect my wishes about social media. Xander opened the back hatch and pulled out a bag of groceries. He saw her face and said, "Don't worry. It's too cold for anyone to go over the side for a swim. It feels like we're in the Bering Sea." I can't believe how nonchalant he is about her death. The weather today is cold, followed by freezing and sunbreaks in the afternoon, Sanders said. He chuckled at his own joke. As if to confirm his weather report, a cold gust of wind pushed Ivy and pulled at her hair. "How high do the wind speeds get here? Have you ever been afraid of storms like the one we had last night?" He shook his head back and forth. "Last night wasn't a storm. It was a little wind and rain. When we get a real storm, you'll know it." She didn't tell him that she had lived by the sea before. Holding her pack, she followed him up shallow and graduated stone steps to the large wooden front door. The door looked vintage, rough-hewn, and solid. It had a black iron hinge with sculpted handle and a code lock built into it. "This is like the gate. Same code, your personal code. You don't share it. Anderson worked this out for me. If he finds out you or I have shared our codes, he'll quit and leave. Don't ever upset Mr. Anderson." "You're joking, right?" Ivy said. "No, dead serious." His eyes lit up. He grinned. "Don't worry, you're going to love Anderson." She realized he'd been kidding, and she rolled her eyes, smiling, trying to trust and not go down the familiar rabbit hole of fear. He opened the door. "Anderson?" "You bellowed." A muscular older man with a happy face joined them in the large foyer. His laugh was deep and rich. He was graying at the temples of his short haircut and low-tapered fade. The energy between Xander and Anderson felt upbeat. She liked the mood. "Anderson, this is Ivy Kelly. She's willing to help us put the library together and research my rare books." Anderson looked at her, up and down, with eyes that were so dark brown they were almost black. "Does that mean Mrs. Smith won't have to volunteer to help with the library?" Anderson asked. "Be nice. Veronica's a true book lover. She did a great job decorating the living room." Anderson looked past Ivy. She followed his line of sight and saw a sitting room with a modern leather sofa, a black leather overstuffed chair on white carpet. A long chandelier hung in the center of the room. It looked like a firecracker that had gone off spraying silver in a perfect circle. Only one piece of furniture in the entire room alleviated the sterility of it. A glass-topped coffee table with a piece of highly polished, twisted, and interesting driftwood. She looked up. Both men, arms folded, were staring at her. "Well?" Xander asked. I like your coffee table." She rose both brows and shrugged. They both broke out laughing. "I told you it was ugly," Anderson said. "I brought the table." He slapped Xander on the back and left the room. Ivy could hear his laughter echo in the hallway as he walked away. She looked at Xander and bit her lip, trying not to laugh with Anderson. Xander's house looked like it was centuries old. When they'd arrived, Ivy's sharp eye surveyed the entire house. She wanted to remember it forever. Outside, each round river rock that encircled the foundation and made the chimney was different, making it look like he'd chosen them from a rocky beach. The colors were masculine and neutral, like the cedar siding. Xander clapped his hands together, making her jump, and said, "Well, let's go into the library, shall we?" He motioned across the entryway to another rustic door. This door also had a key code. It was a carbon copy of the front door. Xander put in his code, pulled the heavy door open, and said, "After you." If his library looks anything like the living room, I'm going to feel like I did when Mom tried to tell me Santa Claus was a construct of man's materialistic mind. She held her breath and entered the room. Her eyes opened as wide as her smile. She put her hands over her mouth, making sure she didn't squeal in delight. "Shut the front door!" Ivy couldn't contain her out-and-out joy. Her mouth hung open. Xander's library was the stuff readers' dreams are made of. It was Downton Abbey meets Hogwarts. Wide-eyed, she memorized the room. The entire west wall of the library was floor-to-ceiling windows. The clouds hanging over the rolling ocean looked like wisps of white on blue canvas. She'd visited a lot of private libraries and even famous libraries in Europe, and even Powell's Books in Portland. Xander's library felt like the libraries in European castles. She went to school to become a research librarian so she could spend her day in rooms just like this, doing her favorite thing, reading and holding books. Her almost photographic memory was her superpower. She tried to devour every detail of the room. 3 steps from the door was a landing that ran the width of the northern wall. A 2-story round turret held floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on all sides except the west wall, which had a castle window looking out over the ocean. 2 more steps down, and there was another broad landing that was home to a sweeping staircase leading to the 2nd-story mezzanine. Bookshelves of beautifully carved dark wood were empty, waiting to be filled. 2 rolling ladders on the mezzanine allowed readers to reach the top shelf. I can't wait to ride the rails. There was a castle-sized fireplace complete with stacked wood, 2 wing-back chairs, which sat in the center of the room facing the ocean. A beautifully carved desk was across the room, just beyond the fireplace. It, too, faced the ocean. A sidebar held what looked like Xander's books. She realized the library ran the entire length of the back of his large home and was the wing that jutted out to the south of the main structure. Near the desk, small paned French doors led to a private patio with a view of the bay. Because they were hanging on a cliff, it felt like they were suspended in the sky. Talking with her hands, Ivy said, "How do you get any work done? This view is amazing." He smiled, his face colored, and he looked down. He's embarrassed. Is that humility? He put a hand on his hip and poked at something with his shoe before he looked up at her. "It's the most beautiful place on earth to me. It's literally the dream of a lifetime that kept me sending books to publishers and querying agents until finally one took off. Then they were coming to me. It would be an honor to be part of building anything so beautiful with anyone. What made you dream of all this?" Ivy said, talking with her hands. He went to the window and looked out at the sea. Smiling, he said, "I began dreaming about this place when I was only a boy. You see, my mom and dad were just making enough to feed and clothe us, but not enough to buy frivolities like books. They thought reading novels or anything other than homework assignments was a waste of time." Ivy's eyes widened and she put her hands on her hips. "There is nothing frivolous about a book. One book can change the whole world. Words are the most powerful thing on the planet, and... Sorry, I get carried away." His whole face lit up. "It's exactly how I feel. I craved books." She could see a memory pass over his face. He was no longer looking at her. He was looking through her. "I was allowed to walk to the library alone at age 10. I went to the library so often, I was like a member of the staff. I ate books for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The best part was, on occasion, when a book was damaged, they would let me keep it. My first book was The Hobbit. It had been read so many times the cover was pulled away from the spine. I used packing tape to keep it together, and then I feasted on every word." She couldn't imagine him not having enough money to buy books. "My parents showered me with books." Okay, they also made me learn the order of elements and write out the periodic table before they let me have my first sleepover. But they did teach me that books were as important as food. Reading at the dinner table was not only acceptable, it was encouraged. "Don't look so worried," Xander said. "Now that I've made a few million, I've converted them to the magic of books. I keep my mother in the style she should always have been kept in. She's traveling right now." "I love that you still care for them, even though they didn't support your dreams. You know, I still can't believe it's you." "When I read The Storm, I became a fangirl," Ivy said. He squinted at her. "Have you really read every book I've written?" She cocked her head and nodded. "Yep, I know. Shouldn't someone my age be playing video games or something other than sitting around reading?" He laughed and nodded in agreement. "My idea of a hot Saturday night is sitting by the fire reading books." Ivy shrugged. "Is there pizza involved?" Xander asked. "Is that a trick question? No food around your precious books," Ivy said. "Well, don't tell anybody, but I break that rule often." He walked over to his desk and touched the molding, and a secret door popped open. "Is that candy?" Ivy was laughing. "Cool drawer." "Of course it's candy. I've got to keep my strength up. Man needs his red dye 40. "I'll bake some of my favorite chocolate chip cookies and add them to your stash," Ivy said. "Can you make snickerdoodles? They're my favorite." "Of course," Ivy said. "You're a librarian who bakes. I need to give you a raise." Ivy felt lighter than she could remember feeling. "I'm comfortable. I can be myself. Well, as long as he doesn't find out who I am." The nagging lie took the shine off her joy, and she bit the corner of her lower lip. Xander shrugged. "If you're building your dream house, you put everything you ever dreamed of in it. Do you want to see one of my favorite things about this room? Yes, Ivy said. I know I shouldn't get excited, but I can't help it, he said. When I walk in this room, it feels like Christmas morning, every day. He walked past her to the base of the stairway that wound down from the mezzanine. The wall followed the circular curve of the stairway. He put his hand on the edge of one of the ornate trim pieces. Without a sound, the wall swung open, like the secret passage in every scary movie she'd ever seen. What's down there? Ivy asked before she hiccuped and took a step back. He looked at her and laughed. She grimaced. Sorry, I can't help it. My nervous hiccups used to irritate my ex to no end. He looked at her wide-eyed and open-mouthed and slammed the door shut. I'm an idiot. You're going to think I'm a psycho. I'm not sure yet, she smiled weakly. I promise I'm not. I just love having a secret room, he shrugged. At first I was going to store books and merchandise in it, but this is Oregon. I'd have to install a dehumidifier and would constantly be fighting mold. So, I guess it's good for buried treasure? Grinning, he looked over his shoulder at her. Or kidnapping victims. He wiggled his eyebrows. She tried to smile, but it came off more like a grimace. She looked down at her boots and put her hands in her pockets. Do you want to see it? He asked. She put her hands up. I'm good. Promise. Sorry, I forgot I'm still a suspect. Well, you don't look like the cliff-tossing type. From your books, I'm more inclined to say that you'd murdered somebody. The method you'd use would be more creative than a single shove. Ivy did her best selfie smile, attempting to lighten the mood back up again. He nodded, like on the island in the storm. Ooh, I do love a good chat about murder and how to do it, Ivy said. I really do. How morbid is that? Xander laughed loudly. Welcome to the family. You've met my lifetime best friend Anderson. Now let me introduce you to Judy. She followed him out of the library and into a beautiful kitchen. Don't you love the light in this kitchen? He asked. He didn't wait for an answer. Skylights, he pointed up. Sunlight streamed through 3 large skylights and onto a red brick smeared fireplace. The bar in the center of the room looked like it had belonged to a chef. Copper kettles, pans, and all kinds of fun hung above it. Anderson was chopping carrots. Anderson, are the codes set to work at the lookout? I'm going to take her out to see it, Xander said. They should. If you have any trouble, text me and I'll come out and fix it. Luncheon will be served at noon sharp. Anderson went back to making carrot sticks. It felt all too good to be true. I should pinch myself. Ouch. First his best-selling books, and now a real KitchenAid on an island with a butcher block top practically screaming at her to make bread. They left the kitchen and entered a mudroom with a tiny foot or dog foot shower. A leash hung on the wall by the door, along with plastic pickup bags. You have a dog? Ivy said. I don't. My mother does, but I'm watching Judy. She can't be far. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called, Judy, loud and long. A small King Charles Brittany Spaniel came running from nearby shrubs. She had a soft black and white fur with black ears. She jumped, and Xander caught her. Oh my gosh, she's so cute. Ivy reached out to pet her, and Judy barked. Judy, where are your manners? Xander said. Lick the nice lady. He brought the dog closer. Ivy put her hand up for Judy to sniff. Then she began licking Ivy's hand, making her laugh. See? She loves people, and she'll love you, he said. She's our big watchdog, aren't you? Do you think Anderson would ever let me use his KitchenAid to bake bread? Ivy asked. If he gives you permission to use his KitchenAid, consider yourself well-respected and probably the luckiest baker on the West Coast. He motioned for her to follow him across the grassy field. Ivy was very aware of how close they were to the cliff. A small log cabin was built on the edge of the cliff. It had a deck on the ocean side that was almost as big as the house. It was all on land, but only a foot or so from the edge. She was sure it would be like the library. Xander punched his coat into the door and opened it. It was dark inside and smelled slightly musty. There was a vintage-looking kitchenette on one wall, Pacific Ocean, right outside glass French doors on the opposite wall. Her eyes immediately went to the kitchenette. The oven was basic, and there wasn't enough cabinets or storage space, in Ivy's opinion. She had been in the shelter long enough that any kitchen, though, looked wonderful to her. She opened the cupboards and was surprised to find measuring cups, pie plates, and the basics for baking. It was fully furnished. Plates, cups, and cookie sheets. Okay, there wasn't a KitchenAid, but the thought of cooking in a kitchen in a cabin like this one gave her happy butterflies. The log cabin had white chink in between each log, giving it a rustic feel. She opened the door by the kitchen to a good-sized bathroom with a tub. The bathroom had 2 doors. She opened the second door and found herself in a large bedroom with another set of French doors that also opened onto the deck. It was a great design. The builder took everything into consideration, even the 2 doors for the bathroom. One for company through the kitchen and one for the bedroom for privacy if you have someone sleeping on the couch. It's a sleeper sofa, Xander said. They both walked out French doors and stood on the deck overlooking the bay. I told the builder what I wanted, and he did his best to make every cabin unique and at the same time functional. Wind came from the southwest, giving her a friendly push. She looked over the handrail on the ocean side and was immediately woozy from the dizzying height. The thought of someone falling sent adrenaline coursing through her system. Seriously, what do you charge? Is it available to rent long-term? She asked. They stood side by side, looking out to sea. Xander folded his arms and rocked on his heels. Yes, the cabins will rent for $250 a night for 2 people during the winter. I hope to rent multiple cabins. I'm going to charge an additional cleaning fee and a deposit. At least I think I will. I'm giving the entire place its first trial run soon. Are all the cabins ready? She asked. Not even, he said. But thanks to Veronica, everyone staying here for the trial run will be friends and volunteers who will give us honest feedback. I wish I could rent one, Ivy said wistfully. You don't have to pay rent. This is the cabin that comes with the job. Her jaw dropped. Shut the front door! She wanted to scream or maybe cry. Tears began pooling in her eyes. Bagels, not the tears. Now my nose will get runny. Don't cry, don't cry. Ivy fanned her face with her hands like a beauty queen being handed a tiara and roses. I'm sorry, I should be more professional than that, but that's a very generous offer. She was pulling herself together when a thought surfaced. This can't be the place your friend didn't like. The reason they didn't take the job? She searched his eyes. I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask. It's not very businesslike. It is, Xander nodded and laughed at her wide-eyed, open-mouthed expression. She tried to put on her best librarian look and turned, putting her hands in her pockets, mirroring him, and looking out at the ocean again, side by side, trying to look cool and collected. He glanced at her and then back at the sea. When I was starting to publish, I was terrified of losing my apartment, or worse, losing my backup apartment, my car, he said, quietly. I worked and wrote part-time. If someone would have offered me this, his voice trailed off. I didn't put it in the ad or online because I didn't want someone to apply just for the cabin. At the same time, I wanted to give every struggling author free housing. You're a very generous man, Ivy said, in the same soft tone. That's why I built the cabins and I named this place the Sanctuary. I have a project I've been working on that gave me the idea. I want to set up a scholarship fund that includes a literary competition and maybe sponsor a writer's retreat for young and aspiring authors. That's lovely. Can I volunteer to help when you hold your first event? Ivy asked. He smiled and looked at her. Be careful what you volunteer for. It was silent for a moment. Xander broke it first. Well, there's more to see. She followed him in the winding gravel road that led through the forest, linking the small cabins together. He opened the doors to a gathering room, which was essentially a large room with tables, a commercial kitchen, equipment, a walk-in pantry, and freezer. She appreciated the setup. It was a great kitchen for events. One entire wall was a rugged stone fireplace, giving the room the same rustic feel as the rest of the sanctuary. They walked past the pergola, fire pit, and chairs towards the cliff's edge. He quietly explained his plans for the sanctuary, its uses, renting them as Airbnbs to supplement the cost of the scholarship and retreat or camp. Ivy was so engrossed she was close to the cliff before her heart caught in her throat and she gasped, taking a step back. He turned, smiled, held his hand out and said, It's okay, really. Just look, it's not what you think. Her eyes widened and she shook her head. Then it happened. Flashes of her husband's demanding face. Stay here. We're in the present. Feel my feet on the ground. His eyes drew together in concern. He walked back to her. I'm sorry, I forgot the conversation this morning and the woman that fell. I wanted to show you the old lightkeeper's stairway. I can't stop thinking about it. Where were you anyway? When it happened, I was in the library writing. Check with Anderson. He brought me water and cinnamon bears. Cinnamon bears? Ivy asked. Her brows rose while she bit her lip, willing herself not to make fun of him. Xander's hair fell into his face. He put it behind his ear and looked sheepish and said, "Hey now, don't talk smack about my bears." He broke into a grin and his cheeks colored. "Those bears setting my mouth on fire are the only thing that keep me awake for 18 hours to finish editing my work in progress or racing to meet my publisher's deadline. You never want to let a publisher down." "I'll keep that in mind when I finally write my novel." He's like an open book. He's very welcoming and transparent for a man who's hiding from the world. He thought for a minute. "I'm going over to the pergola. Take a look for yourself. I'll be looking for Judy. Promise." The thought of Judy slowed her heart. She was so soft. He didn't wait for her answer. He walked to the pergola and called, "Here, Judy. Judy!" When Ivy saw the dog running to Xander, she turned around and walked the last 10 feet to the edge. Standing a foot from the 1,200-foot drop, she peered over the edge. He was telling the truth. There was an old iron stairway somehow fastened into the side of the cliff. The drop was a series of jagged rocks. The stairway made its way down to a bay or a tiny inlet. It was protected on the west side from waves, the wind, and a man-made jetty that had seen better days. She wondered if the little strip of sand in the inlet was big enough to sit on safely. It looked like the tiny cove was only accessible by a boat or the rusty stairway. Waves rolled in and the water rose, covering the small beach and crashing against the cliff. It's definitely not a safe place to picnic. As the water pulled back out to sea, it created a pattern of eddies in the inlet. She saw 4 rotting log pilings sticking straight up in the bay. The dock had long ago rotted away, leaving one broken piece of wood nailed to a post, creating the perfect spot for a seagull's nest. She stepped back, walking backwards to a safe distance from the edge. She turned around and jumped. He was a foot away from her, holding and gently stroking Judy. "Do you use that?" Ivy asked, pointing toward the stairway. He shook his head. "No," and said, "But it's fascinating, isn't it? The original lighthouse keepers used it. They—" "Yoo-hoo!" Ivy and Xander turned to see Veronica and a handsome man walking down to the pergola. Veronica waved her arms, bangles jangling all perfect pink smiles. "Roger." Xander put Judy down and strode over to the balding but very good-looking middle-aged man who was dressed like he'd walked out of an REI catalog. Ivy began sizing the man up. 50? He's mixing his brand, a North Face hoodie with a Nike t-shirt and expensive Nike trainers. I wonder if he rock climbs or just dresses like he does. Her thoughts were interrupted when he and Xander, both smiling broadly, fell right into an animated conversation. Veronica stood with her arms folded, watching the men, giving each other a buddy hug. She rolled her eyes, but demanded her own hug. "This isn't for pleasure. We need to talk." "Let's go inside where it's warm," Xander said. He looked at Ivy and said, "Roger, this is Ivy, the newest member of the nightly team." Roger smiled and nodded her way, making her understand why a woman Veronica's age would find him attractive. He had a kind-looking, sun-tanned face with sparkling blue eyes like Veronica's. What hair he had left was also blonde. They were a match set, like Ken and Barbie, perfect for each other. "We'll bring him right back, I promise," Veronica said. She put her hand in the crook of Xander's arm and pulled him away. He looked back at Ivy, still smiling. "I want Ivy to join us." He motioned for her to join the group, offering her his other arm. Surprised, she hesitated. He shrugged and went back to talking with his friends and walking. Veronica began saying something Ivy couldn't hear above the roar of the ocean and the sound of the ever-increasing wind. In fact, all 3 looked like they were holding a very chummy conversation. Ivy slowed until she was several feet behind them as they walked back to the house, looking for the flaw in 3 almost flawless people. Then it occurred to her, me. That used to be me, happy with friends. Now I'm a suspicious librarian feeling like I'm in an Agatha Christie novel. I wonder if Miss Marple would let me move in and serve her tea. Musical laughter floated back from the friends to her. When they reached Knightley House, Roger held the door open for Veronica and followed her in. Xander looked back at Ivy, waiting. Walking toward him, she wrestled with her thoughts. What is he? Is he my handsome protagonist or a stone-cold killer? And why should I trust him? And why is there always a Veronica wherever I go? Hi, I'm Shannon, Symonds the author, and I'm recording my book as I edit, which I've actually found quite a few things I've changed as I've been doing this. Sometimes as an author, you read your work so many times that you stop seeing it. And, you know, when I write, I'm not actually like seeing the words. I see like a movie, and then it just comes out of my hands, and I can't explain it to you. But I'll tell you just some fun things about what I put into the book is that there is a mountain here that's 1,200 feet high that we love to hike, and there is a lighthouse off the mountain called Tillamook Head, and it's very dangerous to go out there. In fact, it's been closed for years. There's a beautiful museum in Astoria called the Maritime Museum, and they have sort of the lightkeeper's diary in the last entry. And in order to get out to that lighthouse, you had to go by ship, usually, now helicopter, and they would stick you in a big rubber pair of pants on a boom arm that would swing out over the ocean, over the rock, and then drop you down onto the rock. And people would go out for a couple of weeks at a time and take turns being in the lighthouse. And it was actually quite a dangerous place to be, I think. They decommissioned it, just like the lighthouse in this book. And it was purchased for a crematorium, which I thought was interesting. I do remember seeing the light once when I was a kid. It's a pretty solid memory. I know that it wasn't long after that the light was never on again. Just recently, somebody else has bought the lighthouse, and I don't know what they're going to do with it. I know they were out there. I think there's some problem with the top. The top kind of caved in, but they did go out with a drone, and they did some photography, and it's beautiful. If you go to my Facebook or to my Instagram, you'll see pictures of the Tillamook Head Lighthouse. So I have 2 daughters. They're pretty brave. Actually, they're a little crazy. They're not like their mother, I want to think, but the truth is they're more like their mother than they want to admit. They want to know. They don't want to be like their mother. We have kayaks. And one day I heard that when they were in school, they took kayaks out and around that lighthouse, which is something that even fishing boats are nervous about. And then they said once they got around the lighthouse, they turned around to come back and the tide was against them. And they spent a couple of hours paddling against a really rough current. I have to tell you that they were pretty lucky to survive, and that if I'd have known at the time that they were in high school what they were doing, I probably would have sold the kayak and moved, because it scares me to death to think about it. Ivy is probably a lot like me with heights. I just can't stand them. And the thought of going out to the lighthouse like that, and there is a ladder that goes from like where they drop them off up to the top. I probably would have loved being at the lighthouse, but getting there would have been tough. I'm not afraid of very much, but I am afraid of heights. I don't know about you. I love writing this book. I love Ivy, and I hope you learn to like her. And I'm still not sure about Xander. What do you think? Is he a killer? Is he a good guy? So chapter 5 is coming up, Half-Baked in Books. And thanks for listening and spending time with me. Please comment. Let me know if you like it. Subscribe, and it'll help me get more time to record more books. Maybe I can get the other books recorded that I have. I have 1 through 4 of my other series, and I need to do 5 and 6. So thanks for spending time with me.